The price of a second chance. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like and a comment below about what you think of this story. And don't forget to share it with someone who loves a good tale of love and redemption. She lost everything at once: the man she loved, the home where she dreamed of raising her daughter, and the security she believed was eternal. Pregnant, alone, and with nowhere to go, she accepted the only job available: to care for a child who, like her, carried wounds too deep for his age. What she couldn't have imagined was that by crossing the threshold of that cold mansion, she would not only embrace a broken boy, but also reawaken the heart of a man who had buried all hope of love. The morning began with the smell of warm bread and the metallic sound of a key turning in the workshop lock. It was a Saturday, and Ben usually rose before dawn to organize his tools while the neighborhood still slept. From the kitchen window, Maria loved watching his silhouette cross the yard, his gray shirt wrinkled, his steps deliberate, a young body sculpted by hard work. She'd smile to herself, a cup of tea in her hands, the other resting on her belly, already slightly rounded. They had been together for 6 years. In that rented house at the end of a dead-end street, with a low wall and an ivy fence, Maria believed they had found a kind of peace you don't learn from movies. The kind built with simple routines, inside jokes, afternoons spent fixing bikes, and the familiar taste of home-cooked rice and beans. That morning, she put on one of his shirts, oversized and smelling of him, and walked downstairs barefoot, her hair in a messy bun. She made breakfast as always: 2 pieces of toasted bread with butter, chocolate milk, and a small vitamin-rich smoothie she'd learned to make since she found out she was pregnant. She still found herself whispering the word pregnant, like someone trying on a new shoe. It felt both strange and magical, especially after everyone had told her she couldn't have children. Ben walked into the kitchen, his hands smudged with grease, a smile on his lips. "Did you make that smoothie again?" he asked, leaning in to kiss her neck. "Yes," she replied, "and before you complain, it has carrots and bananas. The baby is going to be strong, just like its daddy." He laughed, gently touching her belly. "And with lots of hair, just like you." In that simple gesture was a whole world. Maria didn't know it then, but it would be their last breakfast together. She washed the dishes while he changed the oil on a client's car. The workshop radio played an old song, and she hummed along, feeling the baby move for the very first time. It was an almost imperceptible flutter that made her stop, tears welling in her eyes. That's why she didn't hear the phone ring, or see Ben rush out, called by his brother to help with a broken-down car on the highway. He left a hasty note on the fridge: "Back soon. Don't lift anything. I love you." Maria found the note 2 hours later, when the sound of the drill and the smell of grease had vanished. She spent the rest of the afternoon restless, as if her skin knew the world had become too silent. The phone rang at 5:43, and from that moment on, she was never the same. The voice on the other end was a stranger's, too formal for that time of day. He asked for her full name, confirmed she was Ben's partner. When she said yes, a pause swallowed the air between them. And then, the sentence came, without anesthesia: "Your husband was in an accident. He didn't survive." The kitchen floor vanished beneath her feet. She sank into a chair, her gaze fixed on nothing. No sound came out. No immediate scream or sob. Just silence. A silence that felt like a knife twisting in her chest. The man said more things, but she couldn't hear. Her body shut down to protect her mind. Everything became an echo. Only one phrase repeated itself, like a skipping record. He didn't survive. Ben, the man who fixed things, the man who danced with her in the living room even without music, the man who held her trembling hand when the pregnancy test came back positive. Now he was a lifeless body, a name on a hospital chart, and file number. She only managed to get up hours later, guided by an almost irrational need to get dressed and go to the hospital. She couldn't remember how she got there. All she remembered was the white hallway, the smell of antiseptic, and the compassionate gaze of the nurse. Ben lay there, clean, a sheet pulled up to his chest. She didn't cry. She just touched his face with her fingertips, like someone trying to wake a person from a very deep sleep. "Love," she whispered. And then she wept. Not with noise, but with that kind of cry that comes from the eyes and throat at the same time, a strangled sob that tears without a sound. She placed a hand on her belly and felt the baby move again. Not now. Not like this. Days later, the papers started to arrive. Fines. Debts. The workshop car. Still in the old owner's name. The house, which would be repossessed because Ben didn't have life insurance. Nothing was legally in order. The truth was, they lived with little, but they were happy, and maybe because of that, they never worried about what might happen. Now, it had happened. Maria was forced to leave the house a week after the funeral. She packed her clothes in garbage bags. She threw away his toothbrush, but she couldn't bring herself to get rid of his grease-stained work shirt. She left with just one suitcase, a folder with her prenatal records, and the desperate hope that someone would take her in. Her older sister Diane agreed to let her stay for a while, but she made it clear from the start that it was out of charity. Her brother-in-law, Mike, made no secret of his discomfort with a pregnant woman sleeping on his living room sofa. Maria tried not to cry in front of them. She would wait for everyone to fall asleep, then lock herself in the bathroom and bite down on a towel. She would cry herself to sleep. She'd wake up before dawn to look for job postings. She'd call families, send messages offering to work as a nanny. No one wanted a 3-month pregnant woman with no recent experience and no references. Her belly was starting to grow, and with it, the urgency, the rage, the helplessness. She no longer felt hungry. Her body functioned on inertia. All she wanted was to go back in time. Just 10 minutes. If she could have stopped him, grabbed his arm, made up some excuse, maybe he would still be there, smelling of grease and with eyes as warm as the sun. But time does not bend for those who need it. It only moves forward, indifferent. That gray Tuesday morning, Maria went to yet another interview, perhaps the 10th of the week. She walked to the bus stop with an old coat clutched tight over her belly, her heart too heavy to carry in her chest. Deep down, she knew it wouldn't work out. But she had to try, because inside her, a life was growing, and out there, her world was falling apart. She didn't know yet that life, sometimes, begins at the exact moment when everything seems to have ended. Maria clutched the handle of her bag, as if it were the only anchor between her and a world that insisted on moving on without her. The sidewalks were wet from a morning drizzle, and each of her footsteps seemed to make more noise than necessary, as if the whole city could hear her hunger, her weariness, her exposed failure. She arrived at the interview address at 9, a simple house with a creaky old gate. She knocked twice and waited. A boy, no older than 10, with eyes too tired for his age, opened the door. He called for his mother, who appeared from the hallway in a sauce-stained apron. "Are you the girl for the interview?" she asked. "Yes, Maria," she replied, trying to smile. The woman's gaze traveled down her belly, then to her hands, as if evaluating a piece of meat. She gestured for Maria to come in, explaining quickly that she needed someone to care for her son, but the conditions were clear. She had to be diligent, no fuss, and willing to stay late. "I don't want any problems, understand? I had one who was always asking for days off, making up excuses for nausea. A pregnant woman is no good to me if she's just going to be a bother, she said, her tone dry, almost accusatory. Maria nodded, although her blood was boiling. She knew no one wanted to hire a pregnant woman. She knew every interview would be a humiliation disguised as an opportunity. But she had to try. Not for herself, for the child she carried inside, who already deserved more than crumbs. She was dismissed 15 minutes later with a perfunctory, "We'll call you," which was a death sentence. She walked back to the street, feeling the weight of the days on her shoulders. Her stomach rumbled, but she no longer thought about eating. She thought about Diane's overdue rent. She thought about Mike's sour looks when she came home empty-handed. She thought about how the living room sofa hurt her back, and how her presence always seemed to be a burden. It was like living in a place where everything was temporary. The roof, the affection, her very existence. That night, Mike came home drunk. He threw his keys on the table, laughed too loudly, and swore. Diane tried not to argue as always. Maria was at the end of the sofa, her feet covered by an old blanket, trying to read job group messages on her phone. She pretended not to hear when he passed behind her and muttered a comment too low to ignore. "So, you get some sucker to support that baby yet?" Diane's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Maria closed her phone and stood up slowly. She didn't answer. She didn't cry. She went up the stairs to the bathroom and locked the door. She sat on the toilet lid and took a deep breath until her chest stopped hurting. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Pale skin, deep circles under her eyes, a distant gaze. Inside, she felt herself fading away, like a candle almost at its end. 2 days later, she found an ad on a classifieds website, a nanny position in an upscale neighborhood. It didn't say much, only caregiver needed urgently. Experience with children is a plus, but patience and sensitivity are most important. Above average salary, live-in position, interviews in person. Address, Cedar Street 798. Ask for Delilah. The name sounded like it was straight out of a romance novel, but the offer was real, and Maria had no other options. She arrived at the place in the most presentable clothes she had. The navy blue dress she had worn to her nephew's baptism, now a little tight over her belly, and the same worn coat. The street was lined with tall trees and walls covered in ivy. Everything seemed too silent. Not the calm of the countryside, but the kind of silence that carries power and distance. The mansion was gray, modern, almost cold. An automatic gate opened slowly, and Maria entered, feeling completely out of place. The garden was perfectly manicured. The entrance smelled of expensive flowers. A man in a suit led her inside without a word. In the living room, a woman with platinum hair, an impeccable posture, and a sharp gaze was waiting. She wore a beige suit and held a thin folder in her hands. "Maria, is that right? You can sit down." The interview was brief. Delilah spoke with precision, like someone who didn't like to waste time. She explained that the position was to care for a 4-year-old boy, a boy who was too quiet. His mother had passed away recently. His father, a busy businessman, was rarely home. They needed someone patient, discreet, who knew how to handle silences. "He doesn't speak," she said, crossing her legs. "Not since she died. We've had a lot of nannies come and go. Some wanted to turn everything into therapy. Others felt too much pity. We don't want pity. We want functionality." Maria hesitated. She wanted to ask more questions but held back. She felt like she was being watched the whole time. Delilah analyzed every one of her gestures with a trained eye. "You're pregnant, aren't you?" she asked, without beating around the bush. 3.5 months, Maria replied, keeping her voice firm. "The baby's father?" He passed away recently. It was an accident. The woman just nodded, as if completing a mental form. Then she got up, went to a side door, and called for someone. Ethan wants to see you personally. He's the one who decides. Maria's heart raced. She hadn't expected to be evaluated directly by the boss, and in a house where everything seemed carefully devoid of emotion. She was led to a large desk. The walls were lined with books, a fireplace was unlit, and there were leather armchairs. And behind the desk, a man with a serious gaze and a rigid posture. Tall, with dark hair and a chiseled jaw. He didn't look tired. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond the body. He didn't smile. He didn't offer his hand. He just stared at her for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Have you cared for children before? Yes, and I cared for my grandmother for many years, she replied, trying to sound confident. Do you know how to handle trauma? Pain? The question cut her like a knife. She thought of Ben, of the baby who would never hear its father's voice, of Mike's looks, of the nights crying in the bathroom. I believe that only someone who has truly felt pain can see it in others, she replied. Her voice was low but firm. Ethan watched her for a few more seconds. Then he said something to Delilah in a low voice. And then he said, "You start tomorrow." She still didn't know the boy's name, or that this job would be more than just a job. But at that moment, only one thing mattered. She was no longer falling. Now, although she didn't know it, she was beginning to climb. Even if it was on the sharp edges of pain. Maria woke up before the sun came out. The room she slept in at her sister's house felt even colder that morning, as if the air knew she was about to leave. She showered slowly, put on the same stiff black pants, the white shirt she had received from a former employer, and tied her hair in a tight bun, trying to hide the fragility of the strands. She took a deep breath as she left, her backpack on her back, and a knot in her stomach that wasn't just about the pregnancy. It was fear. It was doubt. It was everything she couldn't allow herself to feel at that moment. She arrived at the mansion's gate 20 minutes early. Its imposing presence felt even more severe in the morning light. She was greeted by a woman in a uniform who introduced herself as Clarissa, the housekeeper. Clarissa had small, attentive eyes and a voice that seemed to measure every syllable before speaking it. "The staff room is in the back. You can leave your things there. The boy wakes up around 8. Mr. Ethan usually leaves early, so you shouldn't run into him often," she said, without looking directly at her, as if speaking to someone who didn't need to be reminded that she was invisible. The room was small, clean, with a single bed and an empty dresser. Maria put her backpack on the floor and ran her hands over the bedspread, feeling for the first time in weeks the presence of a space that, although temporary, was all her own. The silence of the house was absolute, heavy, as if time had stopped inside. Clarissa returned minutes later with quick instructions, schedules, restrictions, places where she shouldn't go. Finally, she said, "He's in his room. You can go up. But take your time. He doesn't like strangers." Maria nodded and followed the hallway to a light marble staircase. She climbed slowly, her steps sinking into the thick carpet, until she stopped in front of a slightly ajar door. She took a deep breath before gently pushing it open. The room was large, decorated in soft shades of blue and gray. There were toys neatly arranged on shelves, a fabric tent in a corner, and a large rug with star patterns. But what was most striking was the silence. In the center of the room, sitting by the window, was the boy. Leo was small, thin, with dark hair falling over his forehead. He wore striped pajamas, and his gaze was fixed on a point in the garden. He didn't turn his face when she entered. He didn't move. He was like a painting, alive, but trapped in a world that Maria couldn't yet reach. She approached slowly, sitting on the floor at a distance. "Hello, Leo. I'm Maria. I'm here to take care of you, and to play, if you'd like." No response, not even a look. He remained motionless, his fingers moving in an almost imperceptible rhythm over a small blue toy car he held in his lap. Maria didn't insist. She took a book from the shelf and began to read softly. The story was simple, about a fox looking for a safe place to sleep. She read slowly, without looking at him, as if she were only telling it to herself. When she finished, she fell silent, waiting for some sign. But Leo was still the same, still and absent. She came back the next day, and the day after, and the day after that, without rushing. Every day, she would sit in the same spot, read stories, arrange toys around him, and sing softly as she put the books away. She didn't talk to him as if he were sick, nor did she pretend his silence didn't exist. She was simply there. It was a cloudy Wednesday when something changed. As she read the story of the fox for the third time, she felt a gaze on her. She continued reading, her heart racing. When she finished, she slowly lowered the book and looked at him. Leo was watching her, not with fear, not with anger, but with the fragile curiosity of someone who wants to break out of their shell, but doesn't know how. "Do you like the fox?" she asked. He didn't answer, but he lowered his gaze and clutched the toy car to his chest. It was the first gesture. That night, as she was tidying up the small kitchen in the back, Maria heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Clarissa. "He watched you today. He hasn't done that in a long time," she said, almost as a warning. Maria just nodded. She preferred not to turn something so subtle into a victory. But inside her, a spark had been ignited. On the 5th day, Leo approached her. Slowly, without looking directly at her. He sat 2 feet away while she put a puzzle of animals together. They stayed there for half an hour, in silence, but together. And when she got up to put the pieces away, he didn't run. He just watched, like someone who was starting to recognize the sound of his own steps inside the house. What's the biggest sign of progress you've ever seen in someone who was struggling? Share your story. Maria began to notice the patterns. The boy didn't like sudden touches. He avoided mirrors. He seemed to panic at loud voices. And most of all, he reacted to the sound of his mother's name, which Clarissa, ever severe, said was normal for his age. But Maria knew better. This was trauma. It was loss. It was abandonment. Ethan, for his part, was a ghost in a suit who crossed the hall early in the morning and disappeared in silence. He never greeted her. He never asked about his son. But one time, late in the afternoon, as she was coming downstairs with Leo in her arms after a nap in the garden, she felt a gaze on them. It was him. Standing at the top of the stairs, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his face tense. Ethan's eyes were fixed on Leo, who was sleeping peacefully. Then on Maria, and then he turned away without a word. Maria understood. He was watching, always, but from a distance, like someone who fears touching something that might crumble with the slightest contact. In the following days, Leo began to show small changes. He would point to toys. He would touch her arm when he wanted something. He would hold her fingers during short walks in the garden. Maria didn't rush anything. She offered. She waited. She backed off if necessary. It wasn't about making the boy talk. It was about making him feel safe again. In the 3rd week, as she washed his hands in the bathroom, something strange happened. Leo looked up, watched himself in the mirror, then looked at her and extended his arms. A simple gesture. But for someone who hadn't touched anyone, it was almost a cry. She lifted him carefully, and he rested his head on her shoulder. They stayed like that for several minutes. It was Clarissa who saw them, standing at the door with a handkerchief in her hands. That night, Maria went back to her room, sat on the bed, and cried softly. It wasn't sadness. It was something else, something she didn't know how to name. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was love. Or maybe it was the first sense of belonging since she had buried Ben. She still slept poorly. She still had nightmares. She still woke up with her hand on her belly, asking the universe how she would raise a child with nothing. But for the first time, there was a routine. There was a face that waited for her every morning. There was a boy who, although he didn't speak, was beginning to listen with his eyes. And there was a man, too lonely to admit it, who was beginning, even if he didn't want to notice her presence. Not with desire, not with haste, but with that kind of silent attention that is born in someone who has also been broken and recognizes the same fragments in others. He watched more than he let on. Ethan never approached her directly, but his presence was like a discreet shadow in the hallways, a reflection in the gallery window, a half-open door at the end of the day. Sometimes, Maria could feel him standing at the top of the stairs while she read stories to Leo in the living room. Other times, she would sense his silhouette, motionless in front of the study window when she took the boy to the garden. Always at a distance, always in silence. Leo, on the other hand, was blossoming, in a shy, fragmented way, like a plant leaning toward the sun for the first time after a long storm. He no longer pulled away from her touch. He accepted food more easily. There were days when he would sit on her lap on his own. He never said a word, but his eyes would seek hers when he woke up from a nightmare, and his small hands would grip hers tightly when the wind rustled the trees outside. The connection between them was made of silence, but not of absence. It was an invisible exchange, but alive. Something that was born a little more each day. And although Maria knew she shouldn't get attached, something inside her, perhaps instinct, perhaps loneliness, had already chosen to love this boy. The following Wednesday, Maria ran into Ethan in the hallway. It wasn't a planned meeting. He was walking down the stairs slowly, his tie half loosened, and she was coming up with Leo by the hand. The boy stopped when he saw him. Not out of fear, but with the kind of hesitation of someone who doesn't know if they're allowed to run into their father's arms. Ethan stopped. "Is he eating well?" he asked, without looking directly at her. Maria nodded. "Better than before. There are still days when he rejects everything, but we're making progress." He watched his son for a few seconds, then looked at her. His expression was tense, as if he had something stuck in his teeth. "He still doesn't speak." The sentence came out dry, almost like an accusation. Maria felt her chest burn, but she replied calmly. "Every child has their own time. The trauma was great, and he's starting to trust. That's already a lot." "I don't pay for a lot. I pay for results," he retorted, harsher than necessary. That's when the first real clash happened. Maria looked at him without dropping her gaze. Her tone was firm, but without losing her dignity. "I'm not a therapist, nor do I perform miracles. I'm a woman who is trying to take care of her child the best she can. If that's not enough, maybe you should look for someone else." The silence that followed was thick. Leo gently pulled on her shirt sleeve, seeking comfort. Ethan looked away. When he spoke again, his voice was low. "Continue what you are doing. I just want him to be okay." He turned and left, leaving in the air a strange mix of wounded pride and a silent admission. Maria took a deep breath, squeezed Leo's hand, and continued up the stairs. That night, as she tucked the boy into bed, he did something he had never done before. He pulled her pillow closer, as if he wanted her to stay. Maria sat beside the bed and began to sing an old song, one her grandmother used to hum at sunset. The room filled with the soft sound, lulling Leo between sleep and comfort. Hours later, she was still awake in her room. She was thinking about her confrontation with Ethan. Not about the confrontation itself, but about the way he had looked at her. Not with contempt, like Mike, nor with pity, as Delilah sometimes let slip, but with anger. An anger that seemed directed at himself, as if she, with her serene presence, was disrupting a carefully constructed internal system. In the following days, he began to cross paths with her more often. It wasn't intentional, or perhaps it was. Sometimes he would come home earlier. Other times, he would suddenly appear in the living room where she was reading with Leo. He would watch in silence and then leave without a word. But something in his eyes had changed, less distant, more restless. One afternoon, in a moment of distraction, Maria found a fallen picture frame behind a bookshelf. It was an old photo. Ethan and a beautiful young woman, with light brown hair and a sweet smile. Beside her, Leo as a baby in her arms. The frame was broken. She picked it up, wiped the glass, and placed it back on the sideboard. That same day, Ethan called her to his study. "You were going through my things without permission." The phrase was icy, but his eyes didn't match the rigidity of his voice. Maria swallowed. "The frame was on the floor. I thought it was important. I apologize." Ethan looked at the photo. For a second, his face softened. "It was," he said. He turned to the window and was silent for what felt like an entire winter. When he spoke again, his voice sounded strangely tired. "She died here, you know, on the stairs. She was in a hurry, running to answer her phone. It was a call from the hospital, a test. She slipped, hit her head. She never woke up." Maria felt her body go cold. She said nothing. She just stood there, listening. "I was in a meeting, 40 minutes away. She called me just before. I hung up. I sent her a message after. She never replied." He ran a hand over his face and laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. "Everyone talks about the child's grief, the boy's pain. But no one talks about what it's like to live with guilt. That kind of guilt that not even time erases. It just accumulates, and it drains you." Maria felt an urge to touch him, to tell him he wasn't alone. But she knew it was too soon. Instead, she said what she could. "Leo is still here, and he needs you, not the businessman, the father." Ethan didn't answer. But that night, he stayed in the house longer than usual. And as he passed Maria in the hallway, he murmured, "Thank you for taking care of him." It wasn't a change. It wasn't an apology. But it was something. A beginning, perhaps. Fragile, unstable, awkward. Like almost every true feeling, Maria returned to her room, her soul in a whirlwind. She no longer knew where her role as an employee ended and where something deeper, more profound, began. An unexpected connection, tenuous, but impossible to ignore. Because sometimes, the truest bonds aren't born from promises, but from shared silences, from recognized pains, and from glances that, even if brief, say everything the mouth still doesn't dare to utter. Leo began to run through the mansion's hallways with the freedom of someone who, finally, felt at home. He laughed loudly, stumbled, and called for Maria with the naturalness of a child who already saw her as part of himself. He didn't say much, but the little he did say was precious. He no longer avoided mirrors. His fingers no longer trembled at her touch. He slept hugging the blanket Maria had sewn from old scraps, and he would talk in his sleep. He would call her name. Ethan, for the first time, did not flee from the scene. He watched. He participated, even if he didn't quite know how. Maria noticed that he began to arrive home earlier from work. Sometimes he would bring books to read in the living room while she played with the boy. Other times, he would simply sit there, an untouched glass of wine in hand, listening to their laughter. Some days, they would pass each other in the hallway, and their shoulders would brush, not by accident, but by a closeness they no longer knew how to avoid. It was as if the space between them was shrinking, without anyone saying it out loud. She pretended not to notice, but she felt it, and what she felt confused her. Ethan's gaze was no longer that of the boss, or of the man trapped in his own pain. It was something else, more attentive, more alive. One night, she found him in the kitchen, alone, finishing setting the table. Clarissa had gone home early. Leo was already asleep. He offered her a cup of tea. Silence, only the sound of the kettle in the background. "Do you like jasmine?" he asked. "Yes, it feels like home." He smiled, the first time she had seen him smile completely. "I thought this house would never have a scent again," he said. "Not since Mariana." The phrase hung in the air. He didn't finish it. She didn't insist. She just sat down at the table, and they both drank in silence. A different kind of silence, not the kind that suffocates, but the kind that holds. That's where the touch came. Soft. His fingers, almost by accident, brushed hers on the table. She didn't pull away, but she didn't respond either. They just stayed there, still, breathing together. That morning, Maria didn't sleep. She felt like she was betraying something she didn't even know how to name. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. Fear of what this could mean. Ethan wasn't just any man, and she was no longer the same woman. Now there was Leo. There was Luna, growing inside her. There was the pain for Ben, still alive in some corner of her chest. But there was also that stubborn desire to stay, to give in. 2 days later, the tension broke. It was a Sunday evening. Maria was in the garden with Leo, trying to teach him how to draw butterflies. He scribbled, serious and concentrated, and every now and then he would look at her, as if seeking her approval. Ethan appeared out of nowhere. He was holding 2 ice creams, one for Leo, one for her. "I thought the day deserved a sweet ending," he said, handing her the ice cream without looking directly at her. Maria smiled, surprised. She took the ice cream. The heat was making the treat melt fast. When their hands touched, she didn't expect him to not let go. "Maria," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I need to tell you something." She froze. "Not now," she replied. "If you don't say it, then just hold it. Because if you do say it, maybe I won't be able to pretend anymore." He looked at her for a long time, like someone trying to decipher what was behind the control. She looked away, took Leo's hand, and went inside. Later that night, after putting Leo to bed, she found Ethan on the back porch. He was standing with his back to her, his hands in his pockets, his shirt sleeves rolled up. The breeze moved the curtains. It was a solitary image, but not a cold one. She approached without making a sound. "I'm not here to replace anyone," she said firmly. He turned around. He seemed to have been expecting her. "I know. And I won't let myself be loved just to fill a void." Ethan nodded, but his eyes no longer showed denial, only a sincere fear. "It's not that," he murmured. You're different. I see you, not as a shadow, as a presence." The silence that followed was pure electrical tension. She took another step. "Then why do you pull back every time I get close?" "Because I don't know what to do with what I feel," he replied. "Because loving again isn't easy. Loving you disarms me." Maria closed her eyes for a moment, and then, without warning, she kissed him. It wasn't a desperate kiss, or an impulsive one. It was calm, deep, as if to say, "I'm scared too, but I'm here." He responded, with his hands on her shoulders, his body still unsure, but surrendered. And then, when the kiss ended, he whispered, "I'm still not ready." Maria pulled away. She looked him in the eyes with something that wasn't anger. It was resolve. "I am." She turned, not with drama, but with dignity. The next morning, her things were no longer in the room. There was only a piece of paper on the dresser. Love is only worth it if you don't have to hide it, or postpone it. Clarissa didn't say a word. She just cleaned the empty space, her eyes filled with tears. Leo asked for her 3 times that day, and then he didn't ask any more. But at the end of the afternoon, when he drew, he made 3 figures. Him, Maria, and a round belly. Above the paper he wrote, as best he could, in his shaky handwriting, "My home." Leo's voice echoed inside Maria like a silent thunder. "Mom!" He didn't say anything else after that, but he didn't have to. That gesture, so small and so immense at the same time, had opened a new door between them, one that was no longer possible to close. In the following days, Ethan seemed more contained, not colder, not more absent, but filled with a quietness that bordered on discomfort. His eyes could no longer avoid Maria's, and when they did, they held something tense, undefined, like someone who knows something has changed inside, but still doesn't have the courage to name it. She also felt that tension in the air, growing denser. It was like walking through a dark room where every step could set off a trigger. Leo, on the other hand, was in full transformation. He said a few words, almost always in whispers, but he was starting to express himself. He pointed with more firmness, looked for Ethan with his gaze, and whispered, "Yes," and "No," with a clarity that came from affection. And, even more movingly, he called Maria Mom, with a frequency that burned her chest in a way she couldn't explain. It was beautiful. It was cruel. It was a love that was growing on the unstable ground of loss. One gray afternoon, as Maria was tidying up Leo's toys, she found a torn envelope inside a forgotten cardboard box at the back of the closet. It was a wrinkled newspaper clipping. She thought about throwing it away, but something, perhaps the headline printed in huge letters, perhaps the instinct she had learned to listen to over time, stopped her. At the top of the page it read, "Businessman's wife in dispute with partner dies in domestic accident." Her heart sank. She recognized the image of the woman in the photo. It was Leo's mother, smiling with an expression that now, in this context, seemed tragic. She read the text. The article made insinuations that the death occurred after a marital argument, that there were compromising messages between the deceased and her husband's partner, a man named Rodney Talbot. No direct accusations, just those ambiguous and poisonous words that the press knows how to spread so well. At the end, it was mentioned that the case had been silenced, through the influence of the husband, without further clarification. Maria was paralyzed for a few minutes. This rewrote everything. The woman's death had not just been an accident. There was something behind it, a weight that Ethan had carried without ever naming it, and that, perhaps, had destroyed more than his marriage. She went down the stairs slowly, the folded newspaper in her hands. She found Ethan on the back porch, a forgotten glass of wine on the table. He was looking out at the garden, but he seemed to be seeing something else, a place that no longer existed. Maria approached in silence and placed the clipping in front of him. He didn't move for a long time. Then, he simply took a deep breath and said, "You shouldn't have seen that." "But I did," she replied firmly. "And now I can't stop thinking about it." Was it true? About his partner? Ethan gripped the glass tightly. His tense jaw revealed the effort to stay in control. "Rodney was my best friend from college. He was with me when we founded the company. He was in the next office when I got the call from the hospital." He took a long pause. "I always knew something had changed between them. Mariana started to shut down, to go out alone, to have breakdowns. When I confronted her, she denied it. She said she was tired, that she needed space." "And you believed her?" Maria asked softly. "I chose to believe her, to pretend. It was easier than facing the truth." Ethan finally looked at her. "Until one day I found the messages. She swore it was just a misunderstanding, that Rodney had made advances and she didn't know how to reject them. She said she would end it all, that she still loved me. But I couldn't. I didn't know how to handle it." He stood up, walked a few steps on the wooden deck, his shoulders tense. "She fell 2 days later. I hadn't spoken to her during that time. We didn't sleep together. I slept in my study. And the morning of the accident, she called me. She wanted to talk. I didn't answer. I was with Rodney. I chose to ignore her. And after that? After that, she died. And all that was left was this stain, this doubt. If I had answered, if I had gone home, if I had forgiven, maybe she would still be alive." The silence that followed was bitter. Maria approached him slowly. There were tears in his eyes, but they weren't new. They were old, stuck, hard. She didn't try to comfort him. She just said, "Leo is still here, and he needs more than an absent father. He needs to know that he's not responsible for other people's pain." Ethan nodded, with a sorrow in his gaze that seemed to come from every gesture. "Do you think I'm to blame?" he asked, and for the first time, there was genuine vulnerability in his voice, not pride. Maria hesitated for an instant, but she was honest. "I think you've punished yourself for too long. And what if you want to do something for her, it's time to love the son she left behind, not out of guilt, but for him." He looked at her, and there it was. That same look that disarmed her. Intense, confused, grateful, and painful. A look that carried everything he still didn't know how to say. Maria looked away. Not because she didn't want to face him, but because she felt that if she maintained eye contact, something inside her would give way. She didn't know if she could carry the weight of that story so well. She already had her own wreckage, but at the same time, something inside her, perhaps that ancient instinct of someone who always cared more for others than for herself, wanted to stay. That night, she took a long time to fall asleep. She thought about Ethan, about the kind of pain that hardens a man until he becomes almost inaccessible. She thought about Leo, about his attentive eyes, about the affection that was growing between them, like a stubborn plant in cracked soil. She thought about Ben, and about how life was made of layers you didn't choose. When she finally closed her eyes, her body was exhausted, but her soul was in conflict. Because now, she knew too much, and because her heart, against all logic, was already too tied to that house, to that child, and to that broken man. She knew the road ahead would be harder than she imagined, but she also knew that open wounds only heal when they are no longer hidden. And sometimes, only love has the courage to touch them. But not everyone wants to be healed. Not everyone is ready to be touched. It was on a stifling summer night, with the house quiet and Leo asleep, when Ethan came to her. Maria was in the kitchen, washing a forgotten cup, lost in the back and forth of the suds, when she felt his presence behind her. It wasn't the first time they had shared a silence, but there was something different about this one, an added weight, as if the air was pregnant with something nameless. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low, hoarse, and hesitant. She turned slowly, drying her hands on the edge of her blouse. "I'm listening." Ethan took a deep breath, ran a hand through his hair, and walked until he was just a few feet away from her. His dark eyes were clouded with something contained, maybe doubt, maybe fear, maybe a desire repressed for too long. "I don't know when this started. Maybe it was the way you hold Leo, or how you talk to him. Maybe it was when you stayed in that room after the rain, or when you told me things no one else dared to say. But I feel something." He took a step forward. "And that scares me more than death." Maria felt her whole body vibrate with those words. She wanted to respond, but he didn't let her. He continued, as if he needed to vomit it all out before pride stopped him. "I buried a woman I loved. Then I buried the part of me that knew how to love. I thought living the rest of my life without that was a fair price for everything that happened. But now," he stopped in front of her, "now there's you and your quiet chaos, and I don't know what to do." She looked at him intently, feeling her breath catch in her chest. She didn't know if she should run or move closer, but she didn't have time to decide. He kissed her. It wasn't a soft kiss. It wasn't light. It was desperate. It was confusing. It was the kiss of someone lost who, for a second, finds refuge. His hands held her face with urgency, as if he needed to cling to something he still didn't understand. And Maria, for a moment, responded. For an instant, she forgot that she was there as a nanny, as a temporary guest. For an instant, she forgot the night sleeping on her sister's sofa, Mike's stairs, Ben's funeral. For an instant, she was just a woman, and he, just a man. But the instant passed, and Ethan pulled back. He took a step back, like someone waking from a dream they shouldn't have dreamed. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "This shouldn't have happened." "Shouldn't it?" Maria asked, her voice breaking. "Because you feel too much, or because you feel nothing at all?" He didn't answer. He looked at her as if he no longer knew who she was, as if he were facing something that was disarming him. "I can't love again," he said in a whisper. She nodded, tears burning in her eyes. "And I can't be a consolation. Not for myself, and not for anyone." The next morning, she packed her bags. She put her few clothes away, carefully folded Leo's blanket, and left a simple letter on the bed. "I'm not leaving because I want to. I'm leaving because I deserve to be chosen, not tolerated." She left without a sound, without saying goodbye. She knew that if she looked back, she wouldn't be able to leave. For weeks, she avoided every call. She rejected messages. She asked her sister for a room, and although it came with judgmental looks, she stayed. She didn't want her daughter to be born there, but she had nowhere else to go. The birth came early, alone, on a stifling summer night, with pains cutting through her back and her body crumbling between tears and strength. She called an ambulance, but Luna arrived first. In a cold public hospital room, among hurried nurses and old equipment, her daughter was born. Small, but alive. Strong. Like her. When she held Luna for the first time, she cried like she hadn't cried since Ben. Because there was love there. There was a new opportunity. And there was the certainty that, even if she was alone, she wasn't empty. On the second night, she heard her name at the reception. Ethan. She didn't see him. She didn't want to see him. She asked not to be disturbed. She sent a message saying she was fine, that she didn't need anything. But her heart pounded like never before, because a part of her still loved him. But love wasn't enough. He left flowers. A note. I want to see you. I want to see our daughter. She tore up the note, but she kept the flowers, because inside her, the doubt still existed. What if he had changed? What if that kiss wasn't a mistake, but a beginning? But Luna, now, was the priority. She was the one who mattered, the one who needed a whole mother. And Maria had promised herself she would never fade for anyone again. That night, she looked out the window and whispered to the darkness, "If you really want to be here, you're going to have to fight for it." And for the first time in a long time, she slept in peace. Although her chest was tight, something inside her had been reborn, something that no longer depended on anyone else to move forward. The days that followed were filled with silence. Ethan didn't go back to the hospital, or to the room, or to the reception. He didn't leave any more notes or flowers or messages. It was as if he had understood what Maria needed, distance. But instead of relief, it left a bitter taste in her mouth, as if something important had been interrupted before reaching the last page. Maria left the hospital with Luna in her arms, her body still sensitive from childbirth, and her soul trying to adapt to the weight of the new world she carried. The baby was small, but strong. Her dark eyes seemed to contain time, holding everything inside them. The past, the pain, the unspoken story between the two of them. It was impossible to look at her without thinking of Ethan, not because of the blood, but because of the absence. Her sister's house seemed even smaller. Mike no longer hid his impatience. Diane, caught between help and judgment, did what she could. But there was little space there for a dignified beginning. Maria tried looking for rooms for rent, for jobs she could do with Luna nearby. She even thought about moving back to the countryside. But something stopped her, as if time still hadn't allowed this story to end. Meanwhile, in the mansion, time had stopped in a different way. Leo went days without speaking. He would sit on the edge of the stairs, waiting, sometimes in the morning, sometimes at sunset. He believed, with the unbreakable faith of children, that Maria would return. Ethan, for his part, was on autopilot. He would go to the office but not read the reports. He would attend meetings but leave halfway through. Clarissa said he would wake up in the middle of the night and walk through the house like a ghost. Not out of nostalgia, out of emptiness. He was an incomplete man, and now he knew it. One afternoon when the sky threatened rain, he went up to Leo's room and sat on the floor. The boy was drawing with crayons on a sheet of paper. Simple drawings, clumsy, but loaded with meaning. Ethan recognized a female figure with long hair, holding something in her arms. Next to her, another smaller figure. The boy pointed to the drawing. "Mom," he whispered. Then he pointed to the baby. "Lulu." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "Do you want to see her?" Leo nodded, without hesitation. Ethan got up right then. He took his keys, put the boy in the back seat of the car, and left without looking at the clock. He didn't know exactly where to go. He just knew he needed to find her. He looked in known addresses, called the few contacts he had. He knocked on door after door. With every "we haven't seen her," he felt time slipping away like sand between his fingers. Until a neighbor of Diane's, recognizing the luxurious car parked in front of the simple street, pointed. "It's there, the second house on the left. But I don't think she wants to be bothered." Ethan stopped in front of the modest house. He took a deep breath. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like a drum in his chest. Leo was asleep in the back seat, exhausted. He got out slowly. He went up the 2 steps to the porch and rang the doorbell. Time stretched. When Maria opened the door, it was as if the air around her broke. Her hair was in a messy bun. Her blouse was stained with milk. Her eyes were tired, but she was alive. Strong. A raw strength, built by her own hands, and more beautiful than ever. Ethan stood still for a second. He began, but his voice failed him. He took a deep breath and tried again. I know I have no right to be here, but I need to say something. Not for me. For you. She didn't respond. She just looked at him. There was a hardness in her face, but also a silent curiosity. I was wrong. When I kissed you and ran, it wasn't because I didn't feel. It was because I felt too much. I thought I couldn't love again, but the truth is, loving you scared me, because it made me want to live again. And living after so much pain, it also hurts. Maria pressed her hand against the doorframe. Her throat was burning. And you think that's enough? That coming here and saying that changes what happened? No, he replied with sincerity. It doesn't change anything. But let me try to make it different. Let me meet Luna. Let me get to know you. Now. With her. Not as a boss. Not as a broken man. But as someone who wants to build. Slowly. For real. Then, a baby's cry filled the air. Maria looked over her shoulder. Luna was waking up. And Leo, in the car, opened his eyes and called. Mom! Ethan turned to his son, then looked back at her. He dreams about you every night. He calls your name. He doesn't talk to anyone. Only when he draws you with Luna. She felt her legs grow weak. Why now, Ethan? Because only now did I have the courage to admit that what I felt for you wasn't a consolation. It was a beginning. The silence between them was broken by Leo's soft steps as he ran to her and hugged her legs. Maria knelt, hugging the boy to her. Her eyes filled with tears. Then she stood up. She went inside, and she came back minutes later with Luna wrapped in a blanket. Ethan held out his arms. She hesitated, but she gave her to him. He held her carefully, with reverence, like someone touching the world for the first time. His eyes filled with tears. His mouth trembled. Luna, small, looked at him with those dark eyes that seemed to be mirrors of everything he had been and everything he could still be. She has your way of looking, he said, moved. Maria smiled, but it was a slow, cautious smile. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a crack. You know this isn't going to be easy, right? I know, he replied, but easy is never worth it. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she knelt and took Leo's hand. Do you want to go for a walk? He nodded. Ethan followed her. Together, they walked down the simple sidewalk, under an orange sunset sky, without promises, without guarantees, but with the courage that only those who have already lost everything have, the courage to start over, this time, together, as a family, not a perfect one, but a possible one. The iron gate, which once opened to silence, now gave way to laughter. The mansion was no longer the same. The walls, once stark, had gained warmer tones, children's drawings, and flowers on the windowsills. The main living room, which was once as cold as a luxury hospital waiting room, now breathed life, with toys on the floor, colorful rugs, and the constant aroma of freshly baked cake coming from the kitchen. In the garden, the flowers had grown back, and with them, everything else. Maria walked through the hallway with Luna in her arms, the baby's little feet swinging in the air, trying to reach the leaves that came in through the open gallery. Leo ran ahead in his dinosaur costume, laughing loudly. his eyes shining as if there were no trace left of the boy who had once refused to speak. Ethan was waiting for them on the back porch, sitting on the same wooden bench where, months ago, he had thought about giving up. Now, it was where time stood still in a good way. It was where he watched life happen, without fear, without fleeing. The house was no longer a monument to loss. It was a home. He stood up when Maria approached. He took Luna from her with a naturalness that came from practice, kissed her forehead, and then lifted Leo into his arms, spinning him in the air with a laugh he never thought he would have again. And when he put him down, Leo looked at Maria and said, "Mom, this house smells like Sunday now." She smiled, and so did Ethan. "It smells like Sunday?" she asked, amused. "Yes," he replied, with the poetic wisdom that only children know, just like when there's cake and laughter and a blanket on the sofa. Ethan pulled Maria close by the waist. The hug between them was no longer hesitant. It was complete. It was theirs. And in that rebuilt home, with visible scars and love scattered in every corner, there was room for everything, for memories, for beginnings, for what was and for what was to come. The mansion was still big, but now it was full of color, full of sounds, full of life, and for the first time, fully alive.